Hey everybody, this is Matthew Soltesiak and you're listening to Not the Same Old Lions podcast. Using my sportscasting background, I speak with a variety of guests and interview key players to gain more insight on what makes this team go. As the Detroit Lions enter a new gritty era, we'll look beyond just the kneecaps when it comes to the analysis. Welcome to another episode. In this episode, we're going to reflect on the Detroit Lions' final preseason game against Carolina, discuss how that may have affected final roster spots, and finally, take a comprehensive look at training camp.
Hey everyone, this is Lomas Brown, and you're listening to Not the Same Old Lions podcast.
I'm joined today by James Cook, senior sports writer for the Traverse City Record Eagle. You can also hear him on the Get Around podcast. That drops on Mondays. Good to have you here, James.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, as always.
Well, I am quite excited for this show, but before we get fully started, there's going to be an announcement at the end of this show that you are sure to want to hear, especially if you want to be in the know about the NFC North before the season starts. So, James, let's start with that Carolina game. Coach Campbell talked about it right after the game, and here's what he had to say.
But, man, it was good to see, everything we had talked about with the DBs and the receivers, But once again, look, Dorsey, it was a heck of a kickoff return. It was big turnover he created, takeaway that we had right before halftime that he was responsible for, good in coverage. And then Gilly comes up with another one, man. It was big. And then you got Lucas right before halftime. So I thought those guys played their hearts out. They really stepped up, made plays for us, I thought Starling did some good things again. And then the receiver position, what was most encouraging was, man, those contested catches we weren't coming down with, or defenders around were getting these drops. This week, boy, we made plays. I thought Drummond made some critical catches, and I thought Green really showed up. And, that catch he had where he ran through the dagger for the touchdown, that was big. And that was a hell of a throw by Teddy. But it was good to see. It was encouraging. That's what we needed to see.
There was a lot of good to talk about. Coach Campbell hit on it, and watching the game, it was like, finally, we have something good to talk about this preseason that we've seen on television. And I guess the first thing I want to put out there is I want to give credit where credit's due, because this group has taken the most punishments from anybody, and that is the backup offensive line, because they played so bad the first two games. They played so much better, and that is so important, because if they're not playing well, you can't properly evaluate the rest of the offense.
Yeah, and from what I saw, they looked pretty solid. Like I didn't watch the whole game, admittedly. But what I saw, Sorsdahl looked pretty solid again. Anybody else playing their way into? I don't know that any other linemen really played their way into a roster spot necessarily, because I just don't know that there's a whole lot of room in that offensive line room to move, to keep anybody else. I think, Obina AZ is still probably on the bubble and likely practice squad, I think, especially if they want to keep an extra corner or receiver.
Oh, yeah, there weren't a lot of guys that I thought maybe moved up necessarily, because like you said, there's not a lot of extra spots there. It was just nice to see them play together and play in sync so that you could see others start to flourish or actually see what they had in potential. And I'm going to talk about the Teddy Bridgewater critics. And there's a 5-letter word I'd like to use, but a divisional guy has used it in the past. So I'm just going to say those critics can just chill out, because there's been way too much overreaction of his first appearance. And this game showed why the Lions want him so badly. And obviously, it's not what he can just do on the field. It's what he can do off the field. But he looked like the Teddy Bridgewater that we've seen at times in the past, and tells us we're going to have one of the better backup quarterbacks in the NFL.
Yeah, that pass to, was it to Antoine Green? That
Yeah.
went over the middle. I mean, he dropped it right in a bucket in the middle of 4 defenders to Green. If you're looking, depending on how you're looking at it, sometimes maybe they're a little closer than others, but depending on your vantage point from the field. But I mean, there's 4 guys within a couple yards of that ball where Green catches it, and that was just a great ball. He had a couple other nice plays, hitting Dylan Drummond here and there, and hit Coda for what should have been a touchdown, but he didn't hold on to it. So Yeah, I like where they're at quarterback, especially with the Sudfeld injury. How bad would that have been to go into the season scrambling for a backup quarterback with Sudfeld getting hurt towards the end of your last playoff or preseason game.
Yeah, I feel
And
bad for Sudfeld on that too, because he was running out of bounds and it looked like the other guy hit him in the back on the low part. And I was like, the guy didn't even need to do that. He was going out of bounds. And so whether you like Sudfeld or not with his ability, I felt bad for him in that situation. And yes, it's great having him. Obviously, once that happened, you're like, okay, Adrian Martinez is coming in for the rest of this game.
yeah, and he looked like what we expected Adrian Martinez to look like, a rookie who needs work, but has a lot of potential. I think he's going to be a practice squad guy.
So as we were talking about Teddy Bridgewater, you started talking about the wide receivers, right? Antoine Green, Dylan Drummond, and Chase Cota. Those are the three guys we've really been watching to see who can step up and be that wide receiver 5 or 6, not counting Jamison Williams in that numbered sequence there. And Antoine Green is the drafted guy. The other guys are the undrafted free agents. And we've seen a lot of good stuff out of Drummond in practice. Haven't seen a whole lot out of Antoine Green or known what to really expect from him, but he has some speed and some size. And Chase Cota's got that size, and everyone's compared him to a Tom Kennedy type guy. What I saw in this game was Drummond making catches and difficult catches. You talked about the drop by Cota, and then the Green play. I mean, Coach Campbell even talked about that. Great pass by Teddy, but Green has to make the play, and in between all those defenders, and then he takes off and they don't catch him. So I'm encouraged to see Drummond and Green elevating a little bit.
Yeah, Green just turning the Jets on and nobody getting any closer to him. It was impressive to see, and I think you're going to see him make the team definitely, and he can be your Jamison Williams light until Jamison Williams comes back, where he's your field stretcher at wide receiver. So that and that touchdown in the preseason might be important for that, because teams are going to see that and have to respect it. That they know he can go deep and go over the top of a defense and score. So I think he solidified his spot on the roster. Dylan Drummond did as well. Cota, I think, is now on the outside looking in, and probably maybe a practice squad type guy. I don't know that they can risk Dylan Drummond trying to put him on the practice squad. I think that they might lose him in waivers if they tried. So I think they're gonna go with 6, and then once Jamison Williams come back, then they have to make a decision maybe between Drummond and Green.
Yeah, and the thing I think that's most important about wide receivers is, can you catch the ball? I mean, it seems like a no-duh situation, but you see so many drops at crucial times, and Lions fans have seen that through history. And so Drummond holding on to some of those catches, Green stepping up in that critical time, that just gives me excitement to say we finally saw something. And again, this goes back to those backup offensive linemen doing their job so we can see some of this develop. The other thing that they allowed us to see is Craig Reynolds again. I mean, he's healthy, and he actually looked pretty solid, and we know that he's a good blocker. They've been trending that he's going to be the RB3, and this was an encouraging performance.
Yeah, that touchdown run of his was really nice. I mean, he just was able to find that crease, wiggle his way through. I mean, and for a 10-yard run or so down by the goal line, he took an amazingly little amount of contact, just weaving his way through there. And that was a pretty impressive run.
It was. Like you said, especially the way he seemed to avoid contact and just kind of got through there. That shows vision as well, not just running full ahead like a bowling ball going straight. Well, let's look at defense a little bit. There were a couple of nice interceptions in this game, right? Chase Lucas, an amazing play. And then Stephen Gilmore, that guy was active. It's like they were trying to pick on him or something. And the week before we saw that as well, where he got beat, but then he came back and made a big play. He had a pick 6 in this game. I mean, if you watched it close, you could see he was there pretty quickly, but he still did well with that. And I think his recovery on stuff when he hasn't made a good play is something that's impressed the coaches. And so it was good seeing some depth here, perhaps.
Yeah, and I think Starling Thomas is another player on corner who, I think is pretty well played his way onto the team. I think it's kind of going to be, I think, between him It'll be between Lucas, Gilmore, and Thomas. 2 of those 3 will make it, I think.
And
they're gonna keep that. I think they're going to keep that many corners.
And that's got to be a pretty good feeling considering where we were a year ago.
Yeah, to have that nice depth, and to have, they have a pretty established line of veterans ahead of those guys, and to have guys coming into camp as undrafted free agents and playing well enough that they're like, okay, well, we have to keep these guys too, and figuring out, where else we can maybe save a roster spot to keep one of these corners who we really like. So it's great to have that extra depth. I mean, we've already got Mosley going to start the year on the PUP list, I think, and so get 1 or 2 more injuries in the secondary and could be hurting, but they've got those rookies who played really well in the preseason. I mean, and Gilmore, that pick 6 was pretty impressive. He was maybe there a little bit early, and I think in the regular season that gets called for pass interference. But it wasn't impressive. But it was an impressive one-handed catch too, because he had his arm around the back of the receiver and caught the ball with one hand with his right hand, and then just kept going and was gone.
Well, let's move over to special teams, because I got to talk about kick returns. Dorsey and Green, I don't want to take anything away from them. They both had some nice returns. I think one was 62 yards and one was 32 yards. But they did well. And my point is right? So this means something more to me, and it goes back to what Dan Campbell said after last week's game. He talked about the blocking by the other 10 players on special teams. And if you have multiple people with decent kick returns, it means a couple things, right? You could have a couple special guys at returner, but it also shows the rest of the team is getting it done on special teams. And that makes it even that much more encouraging for whoever wins the job back there.
Yeah, because you had Maurice Alexander return that 95-yarder, I think, earlier in the preseason for a touchdown too. So yeah, it doesn't seem to matter who they put back there as the returner. They're getting good lanes and getting decent yardage. Dorsey had a really nice return, and then Green had a really nice return as well. So it's a matter of, I think Green making the roster, one of the things is he was going to have to prove that he can play on special teams, and I think he did that by showing he can at least handle some return responsibilities, if not be on a gunner or blocker or something like that on some of the other units. These fringy guys that are just going to barely make the bottom of the roster, they better be able to play special teams.
Well, let's stay with special teams and go to the other part of it. Part we don't want to talk about, but we have to, the kicking part. It's been a weird offseason with that. Riley Patterson, I was looking forward to doing this show and just boasting about Riley Patterson. I was looking forward to it. Obviously, he kicked a 53-yard field goal that was short. He missed an extra point. The reason I was looking forward to boasting about him is because 2 years ago when he filled in for Austin Seibert, we've already talked about this, I thought he was very admirable. I was surprised they cut him last year. I thought it was a mistake, even though a lot of people didn't, and they thought Seibert was the better guy coming out of camp. Seibert got hurt again. Patterson's with the Jaguars at that point. We go through our odyssey of whatever until we get Michael Badgley. Badgley got let go. We have Riley Patterson. Patterson's going to be our field goal kicker. And so Dan Campbell didn't want to talk about it. They asked him about the kicking. He goes, I don't want to talk about field goal kickers. So I'm cautiously optimistic about Patterson. The sky is not falling to me, but it's not as beautiful as I was hoping. I was expecting a nice sailor sunset as the preseason ended with Patterson. And I don't know what we have, but I'm hopeful. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I mean, it was one extra point and one really long field goal that's at the end of his range, kind of, towards the end of his range at least. So I don't think the sky is falling on Riley Patterson. They traded for him for a reason. They know what they have there. So I don't think that it's as bad as people are saying. I'm seeing on like Lions message boards where people are just like, oh, we have to go find another kicker and everything. I'm like, oh, come on.
I mean, the guy kicked well for Jacksonville last year as well when he wasn't on our team, even making some big ones in the playoffs. So let's wrap this up then. So final thought on the Carolina game for me is we should be encouraged how well our backups did against Carolina, especially with them having so many starters out there. Did you have any other final thoughts on Carolina before we transition to the training camp?
It was nice to see Levi Onwuzurike play well again. So back-to-back games where he came in had productive snaps, was able to collapse the pocket a bit, apply some pressure, played the run very well. You've got Durden, I think it was Durden, the other rookie free agent defensive tackle, looked pretty solid as well. I think he may have gotten himself a practice squad spot. I don't know that he is going to beat out any of those other 3 or 4 defensive tackles that they're going to have to make up their minds between. I mean, but they've got Bugs on Uzurike. They got Benito Jones. So they're sitting pretty decent as well as Martin. I mean, the rookie they drafted in the 3rd round.
Right.
So I think they're sitting pretty good in depth at defensive tackle. And then, Durden just gives them another guy that they can stash away in the practice squad potentially.
All right. Yeah, I love that extra depth potential as well. So let's look back at training camp as a whole. What was most memorable, encouraging, or concerning? I'm going to start out with one, Brian Branch. That was, I want to say, super encouraging. That was one of the big highlights of training camp and preseason, is how much potentially more ready this guy is than we thought. Going into camp, it was, this guy will be the first one off the bench, to we can't keep this guy off the field. So what we're getting out of Brian Branch from that 2nd round pick, that's got me pretty excited.
Yeah, I like that. I like the defensive, or the depth at tight end. That they have 3 reliable tight ends who all can come in. They can all block. They can all catch the ball. I like that they were able to move Jalen Reeves-Maybin right back into the game after signing him, and he was productive in the preseason. Another nice depth piece.
Yes, that linebacking core with Germ there, Barnes, Campbell, Anzalone, Rodriguez. I can't believe you can flip a linebacking core this much in 1 year without replacing that many pieces either. And so I'm really impressed how much Campbell's progressed quickly, the growth from Barnes, Jalen Reeves-Maybin. You said it, that's looking like a strength as opposed to a liability now.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's going to be one of those another chess pieces. We knew they had the depth and the guys at safety with Branch and Gardner Johnson to be able to move guys around in the secondary and play them in different roles and different people and everything. But I think they can do that with the linebackers now too, and the depth that they have there.
A couple of the things that I remember from training camp that weren't the best things would be Justin Jackson retiring. That's a guy we thought was going to be a pretty solid number 3 guy. The Jamison Williams injury. Again, I was at training camp, watched it as it happened, but hopefully he'll be fully recovered by the time he's back in week 7. Hoping a wide receiver would step up a little bit more. And, it didn't really happen for much of camp, but we may have seen it in that Carolina game. So I'm going to say there's a glimmer of hope with that one. I was a little bummed that the Denzel Mims thing didn't work out.
Yeah, and you never know. I mean, they released Mims because he was injured. So maybe in a month or so, if he's healthy again, maybe they could bring him back. And then they don't even have to give up a draft pick for him.
That would be really clever.
Yeah. But, Antoine Green played well. Drummond played well. We know what their other receivers are already. I mean, you didn't see hardly anything of Khalif Raymond or Josh Reynolds in the preseason because they're veterans. You know where they are in the pecking order. Same thing with Marvin Jones, and there's no need to put Amon-Ra St. Brown out on the field either in the preseason. So I think that they have to be pleased with the preseason, and that they didn't really sustain a whole lot of significant injuries. Not a whole lot that are guys that were going to be counted on to get a lot of reps during the regular season, and not a lot of guys that are going into the season nursing injuries or anything. So, aside from Mosley, who when they signed him, they figured this was going to be the case.
Oh, for sure. I agree with that. The injury to Jamison Williams is probably the biggest one, but he was going to be out the first 6 weeks. We all know he needs the reps and stuff. The last 2 takeaways I have, one is we talked about it, the Teddy Bridgewater signing. Huge for so many reasons. He can help Jared Goff as a seasoned veteran there to bounce things off. He can help the wide receivers, and he can be serviceable if you need him in a game. The other thing was, you kind of talked about it, with us getting out of the preseason without so many injuries, is because we didn't play a lot of people. These joint practices that the Lions had, I think is going to be the trend that the Lions continue going forward. We might be seeing the beginning of something new.
Yeah, and you're even seeing that as a trend in the high school level now. Over the last year or two, you're seeing teams do these joint practices in high school as well to kind of get in an extra scrimmage with a little bit more controlled environment, a little less likely to have injuries maybe. And then you didn't see a whole lot of the regular guys that you're going to see, other than Kaminsky played quite a bit for a while there. Bugs played a little bit in this game,
a little longer than I thought he would,
and then kind of got dinged up a little bit, and Romeo Okwara played too. Some of those I think are maybe just to get a couple of veteran guys, a couple of reps that needed to shake some of the rust off. I mean, Okwara missed a chunk of last season, so could just been a shake the rust off thing. But I was surprised at how much Bugs played.
So was I. Well, I guess my biggest takeaway or final takeaway from Lions preseason is that the team's looking like the team I hope they would look like as it comes to an end here. Do you have any final thoughts?
No, I'm really liking the depth that they show. I think this is the you can maybe argue that they've had defenses before that have had better starting lineups, maybe, with more dominant defensive lines or defensive tackles, like when they had Ndamukong Suh and stuff like that. But I don't think that you can say that the Lions have had this level of depth on defense for a long, long time. So that's something that I'm looking forward to seeing and hoping that pays off too.
All right, well, folks, that is training camp and preseason. But before we go, here's the announcement I mentioned at the beginning of the show. We will be dropping our season previews this week. And yeah, you heard that correctly. I said previews because we have something special. We have 4 days of previews. You're going to hear about the NFC North from people who cover each of our divisional foes, hearing what they think the NFC North is going to look like this year. And of course, you're going to hear from us about the Lions. And maybe I'll even get James Cook to go on record with a prediction of the Detroit Lions 2023 record. So look for episodes every day. James, are you going to give us a prediction in that Lions season preview episode?
I think I can. I think I can do it. I haven't done that yet.
You have not officially said it. I think you purposely have tiptoed around this thing. So, all right, James, any final words before we get out of here?
I think I'm good.
All right. Thanks again for joining the show. Remember, folks, you can catch James at record-eagle.com and also the Get Around podcast. And again, it does drop on Mondays. Thank you so much for tuning in, folks. Please subscribe to Not the Same Old Lions podcast. Get alerts about the new episodes. If you're listening on YouTube, please hit that like button and subscribe. It would mean the world. Please tell your friends about the show. You can follow me on Twitter at Matt Soltesiak. And you can find all the episodes at notthesameoldlions.com. Until next time, stay gritty, my friends.